My son said I wouldn't need the pension anymore. That's how the day began. Just a sentence on the phone that froze the air around me. I stood in my kitchen, the morning light cutting through the curtains, glinting off the old teacup I'd set beside the kettle. I'm Margaret, 58, retired teacher, widow for 6 quiet years. My life had become small but peaceful. Mornings with the paper, afternoons tending the roses, evenings watching the street lamps flicker on outside the window. The kettle began to whistle. I almost didn't pick up the phone when it rang again, but Daniel never called twice in a row. His voice was light, too casual. "Mom, don't worry about the pension. You won't need it anymore." "What do you mean?" A pause, then a faint chuckle. "I've taken care of everything." It's sorted. Something inside me turned cold. There was no kindness in his tone, only control. I hung up and stood for a long moment, hearing the slow drip of water from the tap. My husband's photo sat on the counter, his smile patient, almost warning. I whispered to it. He wouldn't... Would he? I walked to the garden just to breathe. The air smelled of damp earth and cut grass, the scent grounding me while my thoughts spun. Daniel had always been charming, helpful when it suited him. He'd helped me with online forms once, said he'd manage the pension portal because the layout was confusing. I'd trusted him, as any mother would. That afternoon, I called the bank. The line crackled before a young woman answered. "Mrs. Collins, the records show a recent transfer from your pension fund." "How recent?" "Last week, full withdrawal." I felt the ground tilt. "That can't be right. I didn't approve anything." There was silence, then a cautious tone. "It was processed under your authorization. I can send you the statement, ma'am." When the envelope arrived the next day, I sat at the kitchen table before opening it. The paper crackled between my fingers, the sound sharp in the quiet house. Each line of print felt like a cut. Date, signature, transaction complete. My eyes stopped on the bottom of the page. His name, his handwriting. He'd signed where mine should have been. I went back to the phone, my hands trembling. "There must be some mistake," I told the bank. The clerk hesitated. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins, but the account shows verified consent." "I never gave it," I said quietly. He did. The woman didn't argue, but her silence said enough. I thanked her, though my voice cracked on the last word. When I hung up, the house seemed smaller. Even the ticking clock on the wall sounded different, faster, accusing. I made tea but couldn't drink it. The warmth felt wrong in my hands. I set the cup down, staring at the ripples trembling across the surface. He hadn't just taken my money. He'd stolen something far worse, the illusion that family means safety. That evening I sat by the window, lights from passing cars washing across the photo frames on the mantel. One showed Daniel as a boy, holding a paper kite, his grin wide and unguarded. I traced the edge of the glass, remembering the smell of rain from that day, the way he'd run into my arms when the string snapped. I used to think he'd never let me fall, but the truth was clear now. Whatever part of him I'd trusted had learned how to mimic love while hiding greed underneath. My pulse steadied. Shock gave way to anger, and anger to something sharper, resolve. Tomorrow I would go to the bank myself. I would demand to see every page, every signature, every lie printed in black ink. I stayed awake long after midnight, the house too quiet, the silence pressing against my chest. Outside, a stray dog barked, and the sound startled me into motion. I gathered every document I could find, old statements, letters, even the password note Daniel once wrote for me. I laid them in a neat stack on the table. When dawn came, I dressed, fixed my hair, and walked into town. The air was cool, clean, full of early noise, buses, doors, footsteps. At the bank counter, I said calmly, "I'd like to review my pension transactions." The clerk, a man about my son's age, looked at me kindly but cautiously. "Of course, Mrs. Collins." He handed me a file, pages clipped tight. I opened it and stared at the proof of his betrayal. My name crossed out. his scrawled in its place. Each stroke of his pen an act of erasure. I felt the blood rush to my face. "He had no right," I whispered. The clerk nodded slowly. "We'll report this to our compliance department. You'll need to file a statement of dispute." "Do that," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "I'm not letting this go." Walking home, I carried the folder pressed against my chest. The sun had risen higher, but the world looked dim. My reflection in the shop windows seemed older, not just from the years, but from the weight of truth. Back inside, I placed the documents beside the teacup. The house hummed faintly with the sound of the refrigerator. Everything ordinary still moved, but nothing felt the same. He'd signed where my name should be. Every number on that page was his lie. I sat in a narrow office downtown, the kind with faded wallpaper and old certificates framed above the desk. The afternoon sun slanted through half-closed blinds, dust floating like quiet witnesses. Across from me, the lawyer adjusted his glasses and looked at the papers spread before him. "These signatures," he said slowly, tapping the corner of the form. "They're not consistent. Someone forged consent." I stared at the lines of ink, my own name written too neatly, too confident. "You're certain?" He nodded. "Your ID number appears, but the authorization date doesn't match your submission." The air felt heavy. I remembered the night Daniel insisted on setting up my online banking. Said it was safer. Said I wouldn't have to worry about confusing passwords. He'd smiled when I hesitated, patient as always. "Just sign here, Mom. It's routine." Now I saw it clearly. The routine was the trick. I leaned closer to the paper, the smell of ink faint but sharp, and saw faint indentations, another hand pressing down on the page beneath mine. A second pen had carved its presence through the layers. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He used my identity. The lawyer hesitated. "It happens more than you think, especially with family accounts. But this is deliberate." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I thought about the pension, the savings my husband and I had built over 30 years of teaching and saving, and how easily trust had turned into a weapon. I'd raised Daniel to be responsible. He'd grown up hearing me talk about honesty as the measure of a person. I could almost hear myself saying it, and how hollow it sounded now. The lawyer slid a blank form across the desk. "You'll need to file a notice of withdrawal, revoking all financial access he has under your name. It's your first step to reclaim control." "Will that stop him from touching the accounts?" "Legally, yes, but it might anger him." I looked at the pen lying between us. My hand hovered before I picked it up. I signed my name slowly, pressing hard, making sure the ink bit into the paper. It felt like sealing a wound that would never heal cleanly. When it was done, I looked at the clock on the wall. 3:15. It felt important to note the time, as if it marked the exact minute I stopped being a mother making excuses and became a woman setting a boundary. "I'll file this today," he said. "Expect a confirmation letter within 5 business days." I nodded, folding the copy he handed me. "Thank you." Walking out into the street, the sun hit my eyes, and for a second everything blurred. The city moved on, oblivious, cars honking, people rushing by, but I felt detached, like I'd stepped out of my own life. I found a bench near the corner and sat down, the folder clutched against my chest. Inside it were the lies, neat and documented, each signature a betrayal written in black and white. I tried to think rationally. He hadn't done this because he was desperate. He'd done it because he believed I wouldn't fight back. Maybe I hadn't given him a reason to believe otherwise. I opened the folder again, staring at the crisp paper under the streetlight glow filtering through the blinds behind the glass. It was a small, sterile thing, but it represented everything that had gone wrong between us. Trust replaced by control, care replaced by calculation. Back home that evening, I laid the documents on my dining table, the same table where I'd once helped him fill out college applications, the same table where I'd celebrated his first promotion with a homemade dinner. I pressed my palm against the wood, steadying myself. "No more," I said quietly. I picked up my old pen, the one I'd used to grade papers for decades, and wrote a simple line on a fresh sheet of paper. All financial access revoked effective immediately. Then I signed again deliberately in my own slow handwriting and dated it. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to control. Not peace, just clarity. The phone rang once that night. I didn't answer. Let him wonder. Let him feel the silence he'd earned. I placed the papers inside a folder and slid it into the bottom drawer of the cabinet beside the photo frame of my husband. The drawer closed with a dull click, final and solid. I took back the right to my own name. They told me to let it go. He's my son. We gathered in my sister's dining room because that's where difficult conversations had always landed, with a casserole cooling on the counter and a stranger in a blazer sitting at the head of the table. The mediator smiled like warmth could fix forged ink. Old lavender and roast chicken hung in the air, thick enough to slow every word before it reached me. He opened a notebook. "Thank you for coming. We're here to clear up a misunderstanding about a loan." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, careful with the syllables. "That what he called it?" No one answered. Kate kept her gaze on a water ring in front of her glass. Anne folded a napkin to the size of a postage stamp. Daniel leaned back, easy, the kind of easy that only comes when you believe you won already. "I've seen the forms," I said, my name signed without me. "The figures confuse people," he said softly. "You clicked approve. You just forgot." The mediator raised a hand. "Let's speak one at a time. We'll keep this respectful." Respect was the word they used when they wanted the truth to sit quietly in the corner. He made a small show of patience, letting the room settle, then met my eyes with a smile I'd seen since he was a boy, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. "Mom, I took an advance. Business has been tight. It was temporary." "Temporary is a word you use before damage," I said. "How long did you plan to keep it temporary?" He shrugged. "Till the end of the quarter." The mediator wrote in his neat, even hand, speaking as he wrote. "Family indicates informal loan. Mother is upset. Aim for reconciliation." He read the line back to us as if it were balanced. It felt like being counted without my consent. I saw the notebook title when he turned the page. First name, date, and a single comment. Loan misunderstanding. Not a crime. Not a boundary broken. Just a domestic knot to be gently untied. I asked for a copy. He said he'd summarize it later. I told him I wanted the exact language. He made a polite face and reminded me that protocols existed for a reason. The word made me tired. "Why didn't you ask me?" I asked, not to win, just to hear his answer. "You would have said no," he said, almost amused. "That was my right," I said. "No is a full sentence." "It's family," he said. "It's different." The room tightened. A fork scraped porcelain in the kitchen. Somewhere a door hummed against its frame. I looked at the photo on the sideboard. Our parents in winter coats, cheeks red, laughing. And I felt the old ache of what we were supposed to be. I wanted to be fair. But fairness without truth is just a staged apology. A pause stretched too long. I made it shorter. "Here's what I will do," I said. "I will file a formal complaint. If you have proof I agreed, bring it." The mediator sat forward. "Would you consider waiting while we discuss restorative options?" "Waiting serves the person who took," I said, "not the person who was taken from." Spikes of sound rose and fell as the table came alive. "Don't escalate. You're overreacting. Think about consequences." "Think about mine," I said. Silence dropped hard. I kept my voice even. "The stakes are simple. This is my future income. If it's gone, I am not secure." The words steadied me. I hadn't been speaking to persuade them. I was speaking to remind myself I still had a spine. He tried one last turn. "You won't like what happens when people get involved." "What happens when people get involved," I said, "is that someone writes it down exactly as it happened." The mediator cleared his throat and offered a compromise meeting later in the week. "Say, 7 p.m. Wednesday? I can facilitate a repayment plan." "Set it," I said, "and also note that I'm contacting the police tonight." He looked surprised, then cautious. Perhaps allow 15 minutes after our session before taking that step. I've already waited long enough. Kate finally spoke, voice small. Maybe he panicked. Panic doesn't forge signatures, I said. Panic asks for help. No one argued the point. The mediator closed his notebook and promised to email a summary. I asked again for the exact wording around the phrase he'd used, lone misunderstanding. He wrote a shorter note and tucked the book away. I watched the move. That little rectangle of paper had already started its quiet life as evidence. On the porch, Anne squeezed my hand, her eyes wet with apology. "He'll calm down," she said. "He'll fix it." I wanted to believe her. I wanted it so much it hurt. But wanting is not the same thing as being safe, and love without a lock is an open door. Daniel lingered at the bottom of the steps, a shadow where the porch light didn't reach. He waited until we were alone, then lifted his chin with that old defiant grace. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. "You'll regret bringing outsiders into this." I mailed the withdrawal letter myself. The paper was thick and coarse, scraping against my thumb as I sealed the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have, like every folded sheet inside carried more than words. Outside, the afternoon sky was gray, close and low, the kind that makes every sound sharper. The walk to the post office was short, but I counted each step. With every one, the fear eased just slightly. I was doing something real. At the counter, I asked for tracking. The clerk stamped the corner twice and slid the slip toward me. "Keep this safe," he said. His tone was routine, but to me it sounded like ceremony. I dropped the envelope into the chute and heard it land with a dull thud. Proof of independence. No one could undo that sound. The next stop was the police station. The floor smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain-soaked coats. I waited under a buzzing ceiling light until an officer waved me forward. He was young, with the kind of gentle politeness they train into rookies. He read through the report I'd written, brows pinched. "Family cases," he said. "They take time." I nodded, though what I wanted to say was that time was exactly what I no longer trusted. "He forged my consent," I said. "That's a crime." He sighed quietly. "It is, but family complicates prosecution. Paperwork first, evidence after." "Then file it," I said. My hands trembled, but my voice held. He took my copy and stamped it. The noise echoed, a single clean strike of authority. The paper came back warm from the press. That heat lingered as I tucked it into my bag. It was the first official acknowledgement that I wasn't crazy, that this was real, that what he did wasn't love twisted. It was theft wrapped in bloodline. Walking home, the rain had started, thin and steady. Drops hit my coat collar, rolling down my neck. The cold steadied me. I kept thinking about what the officer said. Family complicates things. It shouldn't. A signature is a signature. A lie is a lie. By evening, I was exhausted. I sat by the window, watching the mailbox through the drizzle, as if I could see the letter's ghost traveling through the system. Inside the house, the clock ticked loud, the kind of steady rhythm that fills silence when you're too aware of it. I lit a small lamp beside the couch and opened my folder. My stamped copy lay on top, ink still dark, edges slightly damp from my grip. 3 days later, I found my car in the driveway, tires slashed clean through. The rubber edges curled like torn fabric. No note, no message, just the quiet cruelty of it. I knelt beside the front wheel, fingers brushing the cold metal of the rim. I wasn't shocked, just tired. It was the kind of warning that doesn't ask for belief, it demands fear. I called the police again. The same young officer answered. "There's been vandalism," I said. "No witnesses. It's related to my previous complaint." He hesitated before saying, "We'll add it to the file." I could hear him typing. The clack of the keys made it sound so procedural, so detached. When he asked if I had suspects, I said his name. I heard him pause, then his voice dropped a little. "We can't prove it yet." "I know," I said, "but I will." After the call, I stood at the window again. The streetlights had flickered on, halos of orange glowing in the wet air. My reflection looked strange, older somehow, the lines around my mouth deeper. That night, I didn't cry. I poured tea, set it beside the church bulletin still lying on the table from Sunday, and wrote down every date, every call, every reaction. I wasn't going to let time blur the edges. He wanted me silent, so I got louder. The bank froze my life along with the money. I stood at the counter while the clerk printed a notice and slid it across the glass. Her voice was polite but empty. All accounts have been temporarily suspended pending internal review. The words didn't sink in at first. The air in the branch felt sharp, unnaturally cold, the kind that makes your breath visible even indoors. I tried to steady my voice. What does that mean for me? For daily expenses? She looked at me with that mix of pity and procedure. You can file for interim relief, ma'am. It usually takes a few weeks. A few weeks. The phrase landed heavier than it should have. Weeks meant bills unpaid, groceries uncertain, medicine delayed. I gripped my keychain until the edges bit into my palm. So I'm supposed to just wait? I'm afraid so, she said, lowering her tone. Until the fraud claim is processed. Fraud claim. That was the bank's word now. But what it meant to me was a cage built out of systems. I took the paper from her, the texture smooth and cold, the ink freshly set. Each line listed restrictions. No withdrawals, no transfers, no pension deposits cleared. The final line read, access suspended until further verification. Outside, the afternoon wind hit my face. I stood there with the notice in one hand and the folder in the other. The folder that had become my entire life. Receipts, statements, letters, copies of letters. I'd started labeling them with dates, as if order might give me back control. By the time I reached home, my fingers ached from gripping the file. I set it down on the kitchen table next to the lockbox where I'd kept small cash reserves, a habit from teaching days when I liked to plan for emergencies. I counted what was left, $620. It would have to stretch further than it ever had before. I made tea, though I couldn't taste it. The clock ticked on, a faint reminder that life, outside this financial freeze, still moved. I stared at the notice again, reading it aloud this time, the way you repeat something to convince yourself it's real. Pending review. The words sounded like punishment without a sentence. That evening, I called the bank's helpline. After 5 transfers and 40 minutes, a voice came on. Your case is under compliance hold, the woman said. Please refrain from attempting withdrawals while the investigation is active. I'm not a criminal, I said quietly. I understand, ma'am. It's procedure. No, I whispered. It's power. When the call ended, I sat in silence. The house was colder than usual. I pulled my shawl tighter, though it did little. I kept replaying the morning in my head, how even the clerk's kindness was rehearsed, how every policy felt designed to erase urgency. I wasn't just losing money. I was losing permission to live without waiting for approval. The next morning, I went back, a different clerk this time, a man with a neat tie and a cautious smile. We've escalated your case, he said. Fraud department will contact you within 5 business days. 5? I repeated. That's another week. He looked away. That's how the system works. The system. Always that word. I wanted to tell him systems don't bleed when wronged. People do. But instead I thanked him and left. On the walk home, I passed the same bakery I used to visit every Friday. The window was fogged, but I could see the baker stacking trays, warm loaves steaming near the counter. I used to buy one for $6, then slice it thin to make it last. Today, I kept walking. At home, I opened my folder again. The papers were neat, but I noticed how heavy they'd grown, as if truth had physical weight. I started another document, handwritten, a timeline. Every call, every visit, every official phrase. If they thought freezing my account would make me small, they hadn't met the version of me who documented everything. I called the ombudsman's office next. A calm voice answered. We can take your case if the bank delays beyond reasonable limits, she explained. Submit your paperwork and we'll investigate. I'll deliver it myself, I said. Most people email. I'm not most people. When I hung up, I looked at the notice one last time. The ink had dried fully now. The page was cold between my fingers, but the calm inside me was not. They froze my money, not my will. For the first time, someone listened without calling me hysterical. The ombudsman's office was small and square, walls lined with dull gray files that probably held stories like mine, quiet disasters waiting to be acknowledged. The air smelled of disinfectant and old paper, sharp and clean, as if truth itself had to be sterilized before being handled. The investigator sat across from me, her hands folded over a notepad. She had that calm, professional tone that said she'd heard worse and still believed people. "Start from the beginning," she said. So I did. I told her about the forged forms, the frozen account, the silence that followed when I confronted my son. I spoke slowly, every detail like glass I had to pick out carefully. She didn't interrupt. When I reached the part about the bank letters, she nodded once, wrote something and said, "We'll request his records directly." The way she said, "we," almost undid me. I hadn't heard that word used on my side in weeks. She opened a folder and began listing the documents they'd demand: account summaries, withdrawal confirmations, transaction authorizations. Her pen moved quickly. Then she read the amounts aloud as she found them in the preliminary file: $9,200, $6,400, $4,800, $3,500. 4 withdrawals, she said, all within 1 week. My breath caught. "He took $23,900, I whispered. She glanced up. "Yes, it's not random. It's deliberate patterning, structured theft. He probably thought spreading it across dates would delay detection. Numbers are cruel in their clarity. They don't soften or justify. They just stand there, proof that something happened exactly as it did." She kept her voice steady. "We'll subpoena the records. Once verified, the case moves to enforcement." "And what happens to him?" She hesitated. "If fraud is confirmed, restitution is mandatory. But family cases—" "I know," I interrupted. "Take time." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was shared understanding, professional compassion, the kind you can lean against for a moment before standing on your own again. She slid a copy of my signed complaint back toward me. "Keep this for your file." I traced the ink of my signature, dark and confident, against the page. For weeks, my name had been used as a tool against me. Now, written by my own hand, it felt like reclamation. As she spoke about the next steps, interviews, correspondence, verification, I watched her pen move, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the room. It reminded me of my classroom days, the same faint floral note I used to associate with calm authority. I hadn't realized how much I missed that kind of steadiness. When the meeting ended, she stood and shook my hand firmly. "We'll keep you updated weekly. You did the right thing coming here." "Thank you," I said, the words landing heavier than I meant them to. Outside, the corridor was bright and cold. I walked slowly, clutching the folder to my chest. It felt alive in a strange way, a heartbeat of paper and ink carrying everything I'd been trying to prove. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel invisible. At the elevator, I caught my reflection in the metal door. Looked older, yes, but also clearer somehow, like a photograph finally focused. The numbers ran through my head again. 9,200, 6,400, 4,800, $3,500. Each one a piece of him, a choice he made. Not need, not accident. Choice. Back home, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. The afternoon light stretched long across the paper edges, and for a second, the folder looked almost sacred. Proof has its own kind of holiness. It doesn't fix pain, but it builds a path out of it. I wrote a note in the margin of my notebook. Relief is not forgiveness. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about correction, making the record match reality. Later, when the phone rang, I thought it might be the investigator again. I almost wanted it to be her, to hear that calm tone confirm what I already knew, but it was silence on the other end, a breath, and then the line clicked dead. He didn't just take money, He built a map of it. She whispered that he'd hidden something in their garage. Her voice came through the phone barely above a breath, like she was afraid the walls might hear her. "Boxes," she said, "with your name written on them." For a second, I couldn't speak. I stared at the folder on my table, the one I'd been building like armor, and tried to understand what she meant. "My name?" I asked. "Yes, in marker, on the lids. I think you should see." The hum of her refrigerator filled the background of the call, small and ordinary against the weight of what she was saying. It was always the ordinary sounds that broke me, the clink of a spoon, the rustle of papers, because they reminded me life still moved, even while mine had stopped. She told me she'd opened one box when he wasn't home. Inside were sealed envelopes from the pension office, letters marked final authorization and response required. My throat tightened. Those were the letters I'd been waiting for, the ones I thought never arrived. "Can you prove it?" I asked. "I took pictures," she said. "I'll send them." A minute later, my phone buzzed again. The first photo appeared. Cardboard box, tape half torn, my name written in black ink. The second showed a neat pile of unopened letters, each stamped with official seals. I zoomed in until the words blurred, my reflection caught on the screen like a ghost. "He kept them from me," I said quietly. "I think he didn't want you to find out how much was transferred," she replied. "He told me it was just temporary, that you'd agreed." "I didn't." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, uneven and quick. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know who else to call. I can't keep pretending this is fine." I wanted to be angry at her, but what I felt was something closer to exhaustion. "You did the right thing," I said. "Keep the photos safe. Don't tell him you called." She hesitated. "He's been different lately. Nervous. He checks his phone a lot." "Then you should be careful," I said. When we hung up, I sat there in silence, the hum of my own refrigerator filling the space she'd left. I opened my notebook and wrote down every detail: time, date, what she said. Then I printed the photos and slid them into a plastic sleeve in the folder. The paper felt cold beneath my fingers. Proof again, real and undeniable. I looked at the last image, at the stack of letters addressed to me, and tried to imagine him sealing those boxes. What kind of son hides his mother's future in a garage? For the first time, I understood something I hadn't wanted to. This wasn't about debt anymore. It was about control, about how much of my life he could keep locked away, piece by piece, while smiling across a dinner table as if nothing had changed. I called the investigator from the ombudsman's office the next morning. She picked up quickly, her tone brisk but not unkind. "You've received new information?" "Yes. His wife found unopened correspondence from the pension office with my name on it." "Can she verify dates?" "She sent photos. They match the months of the withdrawals." There was a short silence. "That's significant," she said finally. "Keep everything. Don't confront him directly yet. We'll add this to the file." When the call ended, I walked to the window. The sky was pale and quiet, the kind that looked clean but carried the cold. Across the street, a man lifted a box into the back of a van, the sound of it thudding against metal. It was ordinary. It was nothing. And yet it reminded me of what she'd said, of boxes sitting in the dark, holding the truth like a secret too heavy to move. That night, I lay awake, the photos still open on the table beside me. The light from my phone screen dimmed after a minute, leaving me staring into the dark. The letters had my future sealed inside. The next morning, my mailbox was empty, and so was my trust. The metal door hung crooked, its latch bent as if pried open with something sharp. A few scraps of torn envelopes clung to the inside, fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. The edges were rough, gritty beneath my fingertips. Whoever did it hadn't come for junk mail. They came for proof. I called the police again. The same officer arrived, tired eyes, calm voice, clipboard in hand. He crouched beside the box, studying the damage. "Looks like someone used a flathead," he said. Could be kids. Could be targeted. It's targeted, I replied. He knew what was here. He didn't argue, just nodded. They dusted for fingerprints, photographed the box, and handed me a case number on a small slip of paper. I watched the powder smear under the sunlight, dull gray against the red paint of the mailbox. It looked like ashes, like something already burned away. When they finished, I asked, "Will you check the area cameras?" He sighed. "We'll try, but without a clear suspect, it's hard to get access." "You already have a suspect," I said quietly. He hesitated. "And you already know the system doesn't move fast." That line stayed with me long after they left. The system doesn't move fast, but he did. He'd taken my pension, my peace, and now he was after my paper trail. I gathered what was left, shredded corners, one half of an envelope with my name still visible. I placed it inside a folder, labeled it anyway. Every fragment mattered now. That afternoon, I went to the station to file an updated report. The officer at the counter glanced at the form, then at me. "Break-in of personal mailbox," he read aloud. "No fingerprints, no witnesses, no security footage." "Yes." He stamped the page. The sound was dull, final. "You'll get a copy in 2 business days." 2 days. Another waiting period. Another window for him to erase something else. I thanked him, took the stamped report, and folded it carefully into my bag. The paper felt rough, almost fibrous against my skin, something real in a world that kept slipping away. When I got home, I walked through the house, checking each door, each window. The latch on the back door felt loose. I tightened it twice, then once more for good measure. Paranoia wasn't a flaw anymore. It was self-preservation. That night, I started keeping duplicates. Every report, every photograph, every receipt. I made 2 sets. One stayed in the folder. The other I placed in a small tin box under my bed, the kind that once held my husband's old cufflinks. I lined it with a folded towel, locked it, and slid it deep under the frame. It wasn't much, but it was control. Sleep came late. Every creak in the house felt louder. Every passing car light threw strange shapes on the wall. I caught myself staring at the ceiling, whispering, "I won't be erased." By morning, I decided to call the investigator again. When she answered, her voice was steady, businesslike. "I saw the police report," she said before I spoke. "You did the right thing." "They didn't find anything," I told her. "They won't," she replied. "This kind of intimidation isn't about evidence, it's about exhaustion. They want you to stop." "I won't," I said. There was a pause, then a softer tone. "Then document everything, even silence, especially silence." After the call, I sat at my desk, opened my journal, and wrote the date, the hour, the weather, even how long the officer stayed. It felt obsessive, but necessary. The truth was becoming a pattern, and I needed to trace it before he wiped it clean. That afternoon, I checked the mailbox again. Empty, of course. I ran my fingers along the jagged metal edge, the same one that had cut my skin yesterday. A small nick reopened, just enough for a drop of blood to bloom. I watched it fall onto the steel, bright and definite. Somewhere between fear and fatigue, something inside me hardened. If he thought intimidation would silence me, he'd forgotten who raised him. He was erasing the evidence faster than I could find it. The envelope was thick and official. It had begun. It waited on the doormat like a verdict, my name printed in bold above the seal. I sat at the kitchen table, the afternoon light hitting the paper in a hard, clear strip. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single letter. Notice of hearing. Pension fraud inquiry. Date, time, location. The government crest at the top. The words were plain but heavy, the kind that shifted something inside you even before you finished reading. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The lamp above me hummed softly, steady and merciless. Every line was a reminder that this fight was no longer private. I'd been asking to be heard, and now I would be. I called the investigator. "I received the notice," I said. trying to keep my voice even. "I'll attend as witness," she replied. "You won't be alone." Do hearings like this ever end well? For the honest ones, yes. I wanted to believe her. After we hung up, I spread my documents across the table. Letters, photos, statements, all carefully labeled. My folder had become a map of betrayal, but also of survival. I checked everything twice, then slid the hearing notice into the front sleeve. Later that evening, I sat by the lamp again, tracing the edge of a small prayer card that had been tucked in my old wallet. It was worn, edges curling, the image faded. My husband had carried it once, back when he still worked overtime and left notes on the fridge. "Do the right thing," it said in small script on the back. I whispered the words aloud and felt something steady return to my chest. I thought about Daniel's face the last time I saw him, the smirk when he said, "It's all numbers, Mom." That line had haunted me. Maybe to him, it was numbers. To me, it was years, 35 years of work, trust, and motherhood. He saw a balance sheet. I saw a life. The phone rang again later that night. The caller ID showed his number. I didn't answer. It rang twice more, then stopped. I sat in silence, staring at the folder. Every instinct wanted to pick up and demand why, but there was nothing he could say now that wouldn't sound like manipulation. The time for explanations had passed. The next morning, I went to the post office to send copies of my supporting documents to the tribunal office. The clerk stamped the envelope, her hand firm, impersonal. "Certified and logged," she said. I watched her drop it into the outgoing tray, the weight of it leaving my hand like an oath. Back home, I cleaned the kitchen, a nervous ritual. Every motion had purpose. Stacking plates, wiping the counter, checking the folder again. Routine was control. But when I saw the hearing notice under the lamp, the bold black letters at the top, I froze. There it was. Government Pension Fraud Hearing, January 17th, 10:00 a.m. I read it aloud to myself, like practicing for something I couldn't yet imagine. 10:00, I said. I'll speak. I'll bring the truth. When I turned off the lamp, the room dimmed, and the quiet pressed in. I felt the weight of the years behind me and the strange lightness of knowing the next step was no longer mine to fear. It was procedural now, official, recorded, and undeniable. This wasn't revenge, it was repair. The kind that took paperwork, patience, and a voice steady enough to speak through shame. As I slid the hearing letter back into the folder, the paper crackled softly, the sound clear as resolve. I looked toward the empty chair across from me and said, "You wanted control, Daniel. Now you'll have to listen." This time, the room would hear my name from my lips. The hall smelled of dust, nerves, and judgment. The air was heavy, like it remembered too many confessions and too many lies. Rows of chairs faced the tribunal table, a long stretch of wood under harsh fluorescent light that flickered just enough to make the silence tremble. I clutched my folder, the same one that had followed me for months, corners soft from use. Across the aisle sat Daniel. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. I could feel the weight of his presence, familiar and foreign all at once. The clerk called the case. "Pension fraud inquiry, claimant present." My throat tightened, but I stood. My voice didn't shake. "Yes, I'm here." The chairman adjusted his glasses. "We're reviewing transactions drawn from a government pension account under your name. We've received prior submissions and testimony." He turned his gaze toward Daniel. "Mr. Hayes, do you wish to add anything?" Daniel leaned back, expression smooth, practiced. "It was a misunderstanding," he said. "She agreed verbally. I managed her accounts when she was unwell." The words landed like small stones, dull but bruising. A few murmurs rippled through the room. The investigator beside me cleared her throat, calm but firm. "We have duplicate copies of the authorization forms," she said, "all bearing her original signature, and a second one added later." She slid the documents forward. The copies caught the flicker of light as they passed between hands. The chairman frowned. "Mr. Hayes, this secondary signature, whose is it?" Daniel hesitated. "It's hers. She must have forgotten." I took a slow breath. "Then why," I said, each word measured, "did you sign for me when I was 3 towns away that day?" The room stilled. Papers rustled faintly. Chairs creaked. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. She told me to." I looked directly at him. "No, I didn't." Silence spread, thick and absolute. For a moment I could almost hear the pulse of the fluorescent lights. The chairman's pen tapped once against the desk before stopping. The investigator spoke next. "The withdrawal records show 4 large sums, each approved within minutes of submission. The system logs confirm they came from his device." Daniel shifted in his chair. "I was just helping her with online access." The chairman's tone sharpened. "Helping doesn't usually involve transferring $23,900 to a separate account in your name." There it was, the number, the evidence laid bare. The crowd murmured louder this time, voices low and uneasy. Someone in the back whispered, "Her own son." I felt the air move, heavy but clean. The truth didn't comfort me. It simply stood there, undeniable. Daniel's voice cracked. "You don't understand. She wanted to change beneficiaries." I spoke before he could breathe again. "You forged my name. You stole my future." He stared at the floor. The chairman sighed and turned to the stenographer. "Mark that statement." The hearing continued, but I barely registered the questions. Each one was a step closer to release. I answered plainly, the way teachers learn to explain even when no one wants to listen. When it ended, the chairman cleared his throat. "This hearing is adjourned pending verification of the duplicated forms. Both parties will be notified in writing." His voice was dry, procedural, but underneath it, I heard something human. The crowd began to move, chairs scraping, low murmurs rising like wind through leaves. I stayed seated a moment longer. My folder lay open on the table, papers fanned out like proof of everything I'd refused to let die in silence. Daniel finally stood. He didn't look back. He just straightened his jacket, as if the act of standing taller might undo the truth that had already been spoken. The investigator placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. "You did well," she said quietly. "I only told the truth. Sometimes that's the hardest part." When she walked away, I gathered my things slowly, each paper smoothed, each edge aligned. I didn't want to rush the moment. I wanted to remember what it felt like when the story shifted, when the one who took so much finally had nothing left to hide behind. The air still smelled of old carpet, and fear still lingered, but it wasn't mine anymore. For once, he had no story left to tell. The verdict arrived folded in half, like a quiet mercy. It slipped through the letterbox mid-morning, landing on the rug with the softest sound. I stood there staring at it for a moment, afraid to touch it, because after everything, paper had the power to destroy or redeem. The window beside me was cracked, open. The air outside was sharp, biting. A draft brushed across my hands as I picked up the envelope. The seal was stamped with the tribunal crest, heavy ink against plain white. For a second, I thought I might drop it. Then I tore it open. Inside, one page, folded once. I unfolded it carefully, flattening the crease with my palm. The words were neat, formal, final. Fraud confirmed, pension to be reinstated. I read them twice before the meaning took root. My throat tightened. I had won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of a long storm, damage everywhere, but silence after thunder. The room was cold, yet my hands felt warm. I looked around, unsure what to do next. There was no applause, no gasp from a watching crowd, just the sound of the wind pushing faintly through the open window and the paper resting in my grip. I sat down slowly, setting the letter on the table. My eyes fell on my husband's old teacup beside it, the one he used every morning before work, a small chip on the rim, stained from years of use. I'd kept it there through every hearing, every sleepless night, like a promise that steadiness still existed somewhere. The notice continued, in dry, official tone. Restitution, ordered in the amount of $23,900, payable within 60 days. Numbers again. Always numbers. The same figure that once represented loss now spelled repair. But what could money return? Not the trust, not the years. Just survival, I supposed. And maybe that was enough. I called the investigator. She answered on the second ring. "It's over," I said. "Over?" "I received the ruling. They confirmed it. Everything." There was a pause, then a soft exhale. "You did it," she said. "You stayed the course." "I almost didn't. Most don't. That's why it matters." After we hung up, I folded the notice again, slipped it back into the envelope, and held it against my chest. I hadn't realized how much of my life had been waiting for this one moment, to be believed, to be seen. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. The noise faded quickly, leaving only the quiet hum of the radiator and the soft scrape of branches against glass. The ordinary world was still turning, indifferent to what had just changed for me. I made myself tea, though I barely tasted it. The steam curled upward, catching the faint light as I sat back down. I placed the tribunal order next to my husband's photograph on the table. He looked steady in that picture, like he always had, tie slightly crooked, smile easy. I whispered, "We're safe again." But the safety didn't feel like it used to. It wasn't a warm blanket or a closing door. It was thinner, like something that could still tear if I wasn't careful. I traced the edge of the paper and wondered if he'd have been proud of me, or just sad that it had come to this. Later, I filed everything, neatly, one final act of order after chaos. The folder was thicker now, not with fear, but with closure. I sealed it, labeled it resolved, and tucked it away in the drawer. For the first time in months, I turned off the lamp and didn't check the locks twice. The stillness in the house felt different tonight. Not empty, not watchful, just still. Justice didn't roar. It arrived quietly, printed on thin paper, written in small black letters that carried more weight than I ever imagined. Justice came printed on thin paper, but it held weight. He didn't apologize. He just said, "You ruined me." His voice cracked at the edges, not from remorse, but from rage swallowed too long. The late afternoon light slanted across the porch, cutting through the air like a blade. I stood in the doorway, steady but hollow, the latch cold against my hand. He took a step closer. "Everything I did was for us," he said. "For us?" I asked quietly. "You forged my name." "You left me no choice." "There's always a choice," I said. "You just picked the one that cost everything." His eyes darted toward the window, as if checking whether anyone was watching. He didn't realize that someone was. My neighbor was trimming her roses again, pretending not to notice, but I could see the pause in her motion. She'd later tell the police she heard him raise his voice. She'd even remembered his words, "Make her pay." He shifted his weight. "You could still fix this," he said. "How?" "Withdraw the complaint. Tell them you made a mistake." "I didn't." "You think they care about you now? You think you've won?" "I don't need to win," I said. "I just needed the truth." For a long second, the air between us didn't move. The sound of the wind through the hedges filled the gap where his decency should have been. Then he spat out, "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I simply pushed the door until it clicked shut between us. The sound was small, but it felt like a wall slamming into place. Through the narrow pane of glass, I watched him stand there, shoulders hunched, face shadowed, before he finally turned and walked away. Each footstep on the gravel was sharp at first, then dulled as he reached the street. I stayed there, hand still on the latch, breathing slowly. My knees trembled. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I'd done that too many times already. Instead, I listened, to the wind, to the quiet beyond the gate, to the faint echo of what he'd said. It didn't matter now. The difference between his anger and my peace was the police report waiting on an officer's desk. Later, my neighbor knocked softly. "Are you all right?" "I am now," I said. "I heard him," she whispered. "He shouldn't have come." "I know. Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "They'll take it seriously. I already called." When she left, I locked the window, sliding the latch until it caught. The metal clicked, firm and final. My reflection looked back at me from the glass, older, tired, but standing. That was enough. The police came that evening to take my statement. I told them everything. They wrote down his words exactly as my neighbor recalled them. The officer nodded. "This helps," he said. "It shows escalation." "Do you think he'll come back?" "Not after this," he said. "He knows we're watching now." After they left, the house felt heavier but safe. I made tea and sat by the window. The photograph on the shelf caught my eye, the one of all of us years ago, before money and pride turned family into something sharp. I almost smiled. The image no longer hurt the way it used to. It just reminded me how long I'd been fighting to return to myself. As night fell, I stood at the door again, staring out into the dark street. The air was still. I waited, half expecting to hear his voice, to see his figure at the end of the walk, but there was nothing, just quiet. When I finally turned away, I whispered, "It's over." His silence after that night was its own confession. Peace doesn't arrive. It has to be rebuilt. It doesn't knock on the door or announce itself. It comes quietly, in the shape of ordinary days that don't hurt anymore. 3 weeks after the verdict, I signed up for a community circle that meets every Thursday afternoon. The sunlight inside that room was soft, spilling across the floor like a gentle promise. Folding chairs lined the walls, a pot of tea on the table, and a stack of forms waiting beside it. When I filled in my name, my hand didn't shake. The paper felt solid beneath the pen. The coordinator smiled. "We usually start with introductions," she said. I nodded, unsure what to say when my turn came. When it did, I spoke simply. "I'm here because someone I loved took what wasn't his. I'm learning to take back what's mine." The room was quiet, not with pity, but with understanding. Heads nodded. A woman across from me said softly, "You're not alone." The words landed deeper than I expected. Not alone. For months, I'd lived as if the walls themselves were keeping score, every echo a reminder of what I'd lost. But that afternoon, surrounded by strangers who understood, the air felt different, lighter, cleaner somehow. After the session, I walked home slowly. The street was lined with maple trees just beginning to turn. The light flickered through the branches, steady but not harsh. I paused outside the corner shop to buy tea. The clerk, a boy no older than 20, asked if I wanted the usual. I realized I'd become a regular again. It felt like progress. Back home, I went straight to the garden. The soil was cool beneath my fingers, soft and forgiving. I dug around the roots of the hydrangeas that had survived the winter. The spade caught against a stone, and I smiled. Some obstacles don't move easily, but you work around them. That's what rebuilding looks like. Not perfection, but persistence. The membership card from the support group lay on the kitchen counter when I came inside. I picked it up and ran my thumb over the raised lettering. It wasn't much, just paper and ink, but it marked a choice, a step forward. Proof that I wasn't frozen anymore. Later that evening, I set the kettle on and reached for the same chipped teacup I'd used through everything. The glaze had faded, and the crack along the rim caught the light, but it still held warmth. I didn't keep it as a reminder of pain anymore. It was proof of survival. As the tea steeped, the clock in the hallway ticked steadily. Its sound used to make me anxious, counting minutes between worry and waiting. Now it just meant the day was passing as it should. I sat by the window, watching the garden as dusk crept in. The faint shimmer of evening light brushed across the glass, softening everything it touched. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the ordinary rhythm of my home, the hum of the fridge, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the quiet peace I'd almost forgotten could exist. I thought about Daniel then, but not with anger, more like remembering a chapter you finished reading. The damage was real, the hurt undeniable, but it no longer owned every breath. Tomorrow I'd return to the group, maybe share something new, or maybe just listen. Healing didn't need to be loud, it only needed to continue. I rinsed the cup, placed it carefully beside the sink, and turned off the light. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt steady, grounded, like it had exhaled after holding its breath too long. For the first time, the house felt mine again. I kept one letter he never saw. It wasn't for him, it was for me. Months had passed since the verdict, and life had settled into a quiet, steady rhythm. The kind that feels strange after chaos, like waking up in a house where the storms have finally stopped. I sat at my kitchen table one morning, the air faintly touched by the smell of fresh ink from the newspaper I'd just unfolded. On the back page, tucked between local notices and a charity drive announcement, was a short column space titled, "Your Story." The editor invited personal accounts, anonymous submissions that might help others feel less alone. I read the line twice, then folded the paper back down. By afternoon, I was already writing. It began as a confession, though I didn't call it that. I wrote about betrayal, about trust stolen in plain sight, about how justice doesn't come with parades or headlines. It comes in letters, hearings, and quiet courage. I didn't use names, only moments. I described the weight of silence after a door slammed, the sting of signing forms that shouldn't have needed signatures, the day the bank called to freeze my world. I paused, fingers hovering above the page, listening to the clock tick in the hallway. The steady rhythm reminded me how far I'd come from the nights when I'd count seconds between breaths just to feel time move. The editor called 2 days later. Her voice was gentle, almost reverent. "We'd like to publish it," she said. "Anonymously, as you asked. Are you sure you want to share this?" "Yes," I told her. "It's not revenge, it's release." When the issue came out, the smell of ink hit me again as I pulled my copy from the mailbox. I carried it inside and laid it flat on the table, tracing the printed words with my thumb. Each sentence looked both familiar and distant, like something that used to belong to me but didn't hurt anymore. The final line stood out. I'd rewritten it a dozen times before deciding to leave it simple. He said I wouldn't need the pension anymore. He was right. I needed myself more. That line had once been my breaking point. Now, it was my closure. I folded the clipping and slipped it into the same drawer where his forged forms had once rested. The contrast struck me. What had once held deceit now held truth. That small act felt ceremonial, like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost. A week later, the editor sent a note. "Your letters had more responses than anything this month," she wrote. "People are asking for a follow-up." I smiled, not for the attention, but for the thought that my story, something born of humiliation and anger, had turned into something that might help someone else stand up too. That night, I made tea again in my old chipped cup. The steam rose, carrying a faint trace of memory. I watched it swirl and fade near the curtains, where afternoon light still lingered. Everything in the room looked ordinary, familiar objects, quiet air, but it all felt new. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to check the locks or reread the court order. I didn't replay old conversations or measure my worth in dollars lost or returned. I simply existed, whole, in the space I'd rebuilt myself inside. I reached into the drawer, touched the folded paper once, then closed it gently, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. That letter wasn't evidence anymore. It was proof of something far greater, that truth, once spoken, doesn't fade. It settles. The sunlight shifted, thin and gold, tracing a slow line across the floor. The house breathed quietly around me, walls steady, air light. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment stay. The story ends where truth finally began. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moment stayed with you. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's plenty more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story, with respect and gratitude.